Story number 1. Lackawanna County Jail, Shadows Below. I've always been intrigued by places where history and darkness intertwine, where the echoes of the past resonate through the present. So, when I heard about the abandoned Lackawanna County Jail, notorious for its oppressive atmosphere and the mysterious occurrences in its basement, I knew I had to investigate. The jail, built in the late 19th century, had been shuttered for decades, its stone walls now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. Locals whispered about the shadows that lurked beneath and the eerie sounds that pierced the stillness of night. Determined to uncover the truth, I organized a small team of fellow paranormal enthusiasts to explore the infamous basement, known as the Isolation Wing. We arrived just as the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the dilapidated structure. The main entrance loomed before us, its heavy wooden doors hanging precariously on rusted hinges. With flashlights in hand and cameras ready, we pushed the doors open, the creak echoing through the empty halls like a warning. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, every step we took stirring up clouds of dust that danced in our flashlight beams. Our goal was the basement, a place few dared to venture. The Isolation Wing was once used to house the most dangerous and uncontrollable inmates, but after numerous reports of unexplained phenomena, it had been sealed off and forgotten. As we ascended the narrow staircase leading to the basement entrance, the temperature dropped noticeably, our breaths visible in the cold air. The walls around us were adorned with faded graffiti and the remnants of old signage, a testament to the jail's grim history. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, we found the heavy metal door slightly ajar, the darkness beyond seeming to swallow our light. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The basement was a vast, shadowy expanse, the only illumination coming from our flashlights slicing through the blackness. Rows of old, rusted cells lined the walls, their iron bars cold and imposing. The air was thick with a sense of despair, as if the very walls held onto the suffering of those who had been confined here. We set up our equipment in the center of the basement, each of us taking turns to document the space. As I began to speak into the recorder, narrating our presence and intentions, a palpable tension settled over the room. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the corridors. I glanced around, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching our every move. Minutes turned into hours as we explored the basement, our flashlights revealing glimpses of the jail's dark past. We examined old cells, discovering remnants of personal belongings and makeshift beds that once held the inmates' meager possessions. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, the shadows around us deepening and shifting in ways that defied explanation. Then, without warning, the temperature plummeted further, our breaths visible in the freezing air. I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, a presence pressing in on me from all sides. My flashlight flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced on the walls. I turned to my teammates, only to find them staring blankly ahead, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "Did you feel that?" one of them whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Before anyone could respond, a loud bang echoed through the basement, the sound reverberating off the stone walls like a gunshot. We all froze, eyes darting around the room, trying to locate the source of the noise. Then, we heard it, a series of heavy footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, despite there being no one else in the basement. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling, but there was no response, only the relentless sound of footsteps drawing closer. The shadows seemed to converge around us, forming indistinct shapes that moved with a life of their own. Panic set in as we realized we were not alone. Suddenly, the door to the basement slammed shut, the impact sending a shiver down my spine. We rushed to the door, pulling and banging against it, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps halted, replaced by a low, guttural growl that resonated through the room. The air grew thick with an unspoken menace. The shadows now clearly forming twisted, ghostly figures that hovered just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. One of my teammates, Jake, began to back away slowly, his face contorted in terror. "We need to get out of here," he stammered. But the door remained firmly closed, trapping us inside the basement with whatever haunted presence resided here. Desperate, I grabbed my camera, hoping to capture some evidence of the supernatural activity. As I pointed it towards the shadows, the lens fogged up, the images becoming distorted and blurry. The ghostly figures moved closer, their presence oppressive and malevolent. I could feel their sorrow and rage, the anguish of countless souls who had been wronged within these walls. A sudden, sharp coldness enveloped me, and I felt an invisible hand grip my shoulder, pulling me towards the center of the room. I tried to resist, but the force was overwhelming, dragging me into the heart of the darkness. The other members of the team reached out, but their hands passed through the ghostly figures as if I were made of mist. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of anguished voices pleading for release. "Remember us. Remember our pain." I struggled to break free, but the shadows tightened their grip, their presence suffocating. The basement seemed to close in around me, the walls pulsating with the weight of their suffering. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness, my vision narrowing to a single point of light as the ghosts engulfed me. When I finally regained consciousness, the door to the basement swung open with a loud crash, the first sign of dawn casting weak light into the room. I gasped for air, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked around to find my teammates huddled together, eyes wide with fear but unharmed. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by an eerie calm that felt both comforting and unsettling. "We need to leave," Jake said, his voice shaky but resolute. We gathered our equipment quickly, the shadows of the basement now nothing more than mere darkness, the ghostly figures having vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. As we ascended the staircase, the sense of being watched lingered, a silent reminder of the night's horrors. Once outside, the first rays of sunlight began to break through the lingering fog, casting a hopeful glow over the abandoned jail. We glanced back at the building, its stone facade standing silent and still, hiding the dark secrets that lay beneath. The experience had left us shaken, the memories of the shadows and whispers etched into our minds forever. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. I would catch glimpses of dark figures out of the corner of my eye, fleeting shadows that vanished when I turned to look. The sound of footsteps echoed through my home, and whispers filled the silence of the night, as if the spirits of Lackawanna County Jail had followed us, unwilling to let their stories fade into obscurity. My camera and recorder, once symbols of curiosity and adventure, now served as grim reminders of the night we faced the restless souls beneath the jail. Determined to find peace and help the lingering spirits, I delved deeper into the jail's history. I uncovered accounts of brutal punishments, overcrowded cells, and countless lives lost within those walls. Each story added another layer to the haunting legacy of Lackawanna County Jail, revealing the human cost of a system built on fear and retribution. I realized that the shadows we had encountered were not just figments of our imagination but manifestations of the unresolved pain and suffering of those who had been confined here. One evening, unable to bear the haunting memories any longer, I decided to return to the jail's grounds, armed with new equipment and a resolve to communicate with the spirits. I approached the site once more. The building stood silent, its dark presence still looming over the area. But there was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if the spirits were waiting for us to return. I set up my equipment in the same clearing, determined to give voice to the forgotten souls trapped within the jail's dark history. As I began to speak, recounting the stories I had uncovered and acknowledging their pain, the air grew thick with an unspoken energy. The shadows around me began to stir, their forms becoming more defined as the spirits responded to my call. The whispers returned, softer and more harmonious, as if the voices were finally finding a way to communicate. The temperature normalized, the oppressive weight lifting from the area as the spirits began to share their stories. I listened intently, capturing every word and every plea for remembrance and justice. The shadows no longer felt menacing but instead seemed to emanate a sense of longing for closure. Minutes passed in a serene silence, the atmosphere calm and respectful. Then, a single voice emerged from the darkness, clear and unwavering. "Thank you." The shadows faded, their presence dissipating into the morning light, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had honored the memories of those who had endured unimaginable pain. The voices in the darkness had been heard, not through fear or confrontation, but through understanding and respect for the stories that shaped Lackawanna County Jail's dark legacy. Leaving the site that morning, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted from my shoulders. The remnants of the jail stood silent, no longer a place of torment but a monument to resilience and the enduring human spirit. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering and respecting the stories that shape our history. Lackawanna County Jail remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a testament to the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes, those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of Lackawanna County Jail, remember the tales of those who endured its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. The jail is not just a relic of history. It's a living memory of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the haunting reminders that some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story number 2. Moyamensing Jail, Echoes of the Damned. I've always been captivated by places where history and the supernatural intertwine, where the echoes of the past seem to linger, refusing to fade into obscurity. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for uncovering the hidden stories of Philadelphia, the remnants of Moyamensing Jail called to me like a siren's song. Although the jail had been razed decades ago, the shadow still loomed over the area, a dark cloud that no amount of progress could dissipate. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences that plagued the vicinity, screams piercing the night, pleas for help that seemed to come from nowhere, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. Intrigued and determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate the haunted grounds of Moyamensing Jail. The night I chose to explore the site was colder than usual for early October. A thick fog rolled in from the Schuylkill River, enveloping the area in an eerie silence that was both calming and unnerving. Armed with my camera, a digital recorder, and a flashlight, I arrived at the outskirts of where Moyamensing once stood. The remnants of the jail were now just charred foundations and scattered debris, but the air around it felt charged with an inexplicable energy. As I approached the site, the first signs of unease began to settle in. The wind whispered through the skeletal remains, creating a symphony of creaks and moans that seemed almost human. I set up my equipment in what used to be the main entrance, now nothing more than a gaping hole in the earth. The sky was a canvas of dark clouds, threatening rain, and the only light came from the crescent moon struggling to pierce through the mist. I began by documenting the area, capturing images of the destroyed walls and the overgrown vegetation that had reclaimed the land. My recorder picked up the usual sounds of nature, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, but beneath them lay a subtle undertone of something else. Faint whispers, almost indistinguishable, seemed to float on the breeze, growing slightly louder as the night deepened. Deciding to delve deeper, I ventured towards the heart of the jail's former location. The ground was uneven, with remnants of old stone pathways now cracked and overgrown. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that danced eerily around me. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the very ground was resisting my intrusion. As I moved further in, the temperature began to drop noticeably. My breath became visible, puffing out in front of me despite the mild temperature outside. The oppressive chill was unlike anything I had felt before, sending shivers down my spine. The whispers grew more coherent, forming fragmented sentences that sent chills through my entire body. "Help us! Don't leave! Justice!" I stopped, heart racing, trying to locate the source of the voices. There was no one around, just the remnants of the jail and the encroaching darkness. My flashlight illuminated a small clearing where the ground had been flattened, possibly the site of the old execution block. The air here felt thicker, almost suffocating, and the whispers seemed to converge, creating a chorus of desperate pleas. I set up my recorder here, hoping to capture more substantial evidence of the paranormal activity. As I began to speak into it, narrating my observations and intentions, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of lost souls. The temperature plummeted further, and I felt an invisible presence pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, the ground beneath me seemed to pulse, and the air was filled with the sound of agonized screams. I looked around frantically, trying to make sense of the chaos. Shadows twisted and elongated, taking on forms that resembled the inmates who had once been confined within these walls. Their eyes, hollow and filled with sorrow, seemed to bore into my very soul. One figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a face twisted in eternal anguish. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and I could feel the weight of his suffering pressing down on me. I tried to speak, to ask who he was or what he wanted, but no words came out. The recorder continued to capture the cacophony of whispers and screams, the voices of the damned unable to find peace. Panic set in as the apparitions multiplied, surrounding me with their sorrowful presence. I grabbed my flashlight, hoping to use it as a tool to fend off the spirits, but the beam barely made a dent in the surrounding darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with their desperate pleas for justice and remembrance. Desperate to escape, I turned to leave the clearing, but the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, pulling me deeper into the heart of the jail's dark legacy. The screams intensified, merging with the whispers to create a symphony of pain that echoed through the night. I felt the invisible hands reaching out to me, pulling me back, trying to keep me from leaving, summoning every ounce of courage. I forced myself to keep moving, pushing against the invisible forces that sought to hold me captive. My flashlight flickered violently, casting fleeting images of the tormented souls that had been trapped within these walls. Each step felt like a battle against the oppressive weight of their sorrow, their pain, and their longing for release. As I reached what used to be the central courtyard, the most haunted part of Moyamensing jail, the atmosphere changed once more. The whispers softened into a mournful hum, and the temperature began to rise, the chill receding like a tide pulling back from the shore. The apparitions seemed to sense my determination, their forms becoming less defined, their presence less threatening. In the center of the courtyard stood a single, cracked stone bench, a remnant of the old recreational area where inmates had spent their last moments of relative peace. I sat down, exhausted and overwhelmed, trying to make sense of the night's events. The recorder continued to play back the sounds I had captured, a haunting reminder of the spirit's lingering presence. As dawn approached, the fog began to lift, revealing the extent of the destruction that had befallen Moyamensing jail. The whispers faded into the background, replaced by the sounds of the waking city. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, leaving behind a sense of calm and closure. I felt the presence of the spirits ebbing away, their stories finally being acknowledged. Packing up my equipment, I took one last look at the site of Moyamensing jail. The shadows had receded, the darkness now a distant memory. The spirits had found a semblance of peace. Their voices finally heard and their suffering recognized. As I walked away, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a hopeful glow over the haunted grounds. In the days that followed, the experience at Moyamensing Jail remained etched in my mind. Strange occurrences continued to plague me, whispers in the dead of night, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision, and the constant feeling of being watched. My camera and recorder, once tools of curiosity, now served as grim reminders of the night I spent facing the restless spirits of Moyamensing. Determined to honor their memories and find a way to help the lingering souls, I delved deeper into the jail's history. I uncovered stories of brutal punishments, overcrowded cells, and countless lives lost within those walls. Each account added another layer to the haunting legacy of Moyamensing Jail, revealing the human cost of a system built on fear and retribution. I realized that the voices I had heard were not just echoes of the past but pleas for remembrance and justice. One evening, unable to bear the haunting memories any longer, I decided to return to the jail's site, armed with new equipment and a resolve to communicate with the spirits. I approached the grounds once more. The area was quiet, the remnants of the jail now overgrown and reclaimed by nature. I set up my recorder and camera in the same clearing, determined to give voice to the forgotten souls. I began to speak softly, recounting the stories I had uncovered and acknowledging the pain and suffering that had transpired within those walls. The air grew thick with anticipation, the oppressive weight lifting slightly as I continued to communicate. The whispers returned, but this time they were softer, more harmonious, as if the spirits were finally finding peace. Minutes passed in silence, the atmosphere calm and respectful. Then, a single voice emerged from the darkness, clear and unwavering. "Thank you." The temperature normalized, and the oppressive presence dissipated, leaving behind a serene stillness. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had honored the memories of those who had endured unimaginable pain. The voices in the darkness had been heard, not through fear or confrontation, but through understanding and respect for the stories that shaped Moyamensing Jail's dark legacy. Leaving the site that night, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted from my shoulders. The remnants of Moyamensing Jail stood silent, no longer a place of torment but a monument to resilience and the enduring human spirit. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering and respecting the stories that shape our history. Moyamensing Jail remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a testament to the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of Moyamensing Jail, remember the tales of those who endured its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. The jail is not just a relic of history. It's a living memory of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the haunting reminders that some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story number 3. Philadelphia County Jail Voices in the Darkness. I've always been fascinated by places where history and mystery intertwine, where the echoes of the past seem to linger just beyond the veil of the present. As a freelance journalist specializing in uncovering the hidden stories of Philadelphia, I found myself irresistibly drawn to the abandoned Philadelphia County Jail. Built in the mid-19th century, the jail had been left to decay for decades, its imposing stone facade now a haunting silhouette against the city skyline. But it wasn't just the architecture that intrigued me. It was the myriad of accounts from brave souls who had ventured inside and never quite left the same. Local legends spoke of voices echoing through the darkness, as if the very walls were whispering secrets long forgotten. Some visitors claimed to feel invisible hands gripping their shoulders, pulling them deeper into the jail's labyrinthine corridors. Determined to uncover the truth behind these chilling tales, I decided to spend a night within its cold, stone confines. I arrived at the jail just as dusk began to settle. The sky painted in hues of orange and purple. The building stood silent, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes watching my every move. Armed with my camera, a digital recorder, a sturdy flashlight, and a notebook, I pushed open the heavy iron gates. They creaked ominously, protesting my entry as I stepped onto the gravel path leading to the main entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. The grand foyer, once bustling with activity, was now a desolate space where shadows danced on the walls. I set up my equipment in what had once been the warden's office, a room dominated by a large, ornate desk now covered in dust and cobwebs. The only light came from my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness in narrow, shaky swaths. As midnight approached, I began to feel the oppressive weight of the jail's history pressing down on me. The silence was almost tangible, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing through the halls. I decided to start my exploration, moving cautiously through the narrow corridors that twisted and turned like the veins of a forgotten beast. The further I ventured, the more I felt an unsettling presence surrounding me. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Every step I took echoed loudly, each footfall a stark reminder of my solitude in this forsaken place. I reached the old cell block, a section of the jail notorious for housing some of the most dangerous criminals of its time. The cells were small and claustrophobic, their iron bars rusted and worn. As I entered one of the cells, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, my breath visible in the frigid air despite the warm night outside. I set up my recorder, hoping to capture any unusual sounds. Minutes passed in tense silence until I began to hear it, a faint murmur, like distant voices whispering just out of earshot. At first, I dismissed it as the wind or the building settling, but the whispers grew clearer, forming fragmented sentences that sent chills down my spine. Justice, never forget. I leaned closer to the recorder, trying to make sense of the disjointed words. Suddenly, a cold sensation swept over me, and I felt an invisible hand grasp my shoulder, pulling me backward. I spun around, but there was nothing there, no one to see, no one to blame. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to steady my racing thoughts. Determined to stay rational, I continued my exploration, moving deeper into the jail's bowels. The voices followed me, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. As I approached the old solitary confinement wing, the atmosphere became even more oppressive, the air thick with the weight of countless untold stories. Inside one of the solitary cells, I set up my camera and recorder, hoping to document any paranormal activity. I sat down, staring into the darkness, and began to speak softly into the recorder, recounting my experiences and observations. The only response was the distant drip of water and the faint rustling of debris in the corners of the room. Then, without warning, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a cacophony of restless spirits. The temperature plummeted further, and I felt another invisible hand grasp my shoulder, this time with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. I screamed, the sound echoing through the cell block, but no one was there to hear me. Panic set in as I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my equipment and fleeing the cell. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning in impossible ways, leading me deeper into a maze of darkness and despair. The voices followed, now joined by disembodied footsteps that echoed my every move, creating a symphony of fear that played relentlessly in my mind. I found myself back in the warden's office, the room now feeling like a different place entirely. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist around me. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Remember us. Desperate to escape, I made a beeline for the exit, but the path seemed blocked by an impenetrable darkness. The voices surged around me, their whispers turning into anguished cries that filled the room with despair. I felt the invisible hands again, pulling me back, dragging me deeper into the jail's haunted heart. In a final act of desperation, I turned to face the darkness, shining my flashlight into the abyss. The beam flickered and steadied, revealing the ghostly apparitions of former inmates, pale, translucent figures with hollow eyes and sorrowful expressions. They reached out to me, their hands passing through my flesh as if I were made of mist. One figure stepped forward, a man in old-fashioned prison garb, his face twisted in eternal anguish. His eyes met mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and pain emanating from him. He raised his hand, pointing towards the exit, and the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. The voices softened, their cries turning into whispers of gratitude. I backed away, stumbling through the corridors as the apparitions faded into the darkness. Their presence no longer a source of fear, but a reminder of the lives lost and the stories left untold. The temperature began to normalize, the oppressive weight lifting from my shoulders as I made my way to the main entrance. Bursting through the gates, I gasped for breath, the cool night air a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I had left behind. The jail stood silent once more, its dark secrets hidden within its stone walls. I looked back, half expecting to see the spirits still watching, but the building remained still, as if nothing had happened. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued me, whispers in the dead of night, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision, and the constant feeling of being watched. My camera and recorder, once tools of curiosity, now served as grim reminders of the night I spent in the Philadelphia County Jail, facing the restless spirits that refused to be forgotten. Determined to find peace, I delved deeper into the jail's history, uncovering accounts of brutal punishments, overcrowded cells, and countless lives lost within those walls. Each story added another layer to the haunting legacy of the Philadelphia County Jail, revealing the human cost of a system built on fear and retribution. I realized that the voices I had heard were not just echoes of the past but pleas for remembrance and justice. One evening, unable to bear the haunting memories any longer, I decided to return to the jail, armed with new equipment and a resolve to honor the memories of those who had suffered. I approached the building once more. The gates opened without resistance, and I stepped into the familiar yet foreboding grounds. This time, I wasn't seeking answers for myself but striving to give voice to the forgotten souls trapped in the penitentiary's dark history. I walked through the corridors with a sense of purpose, setting up my equipment in the warden's office once more. I began to speak, recounting the stories I had uncovered, acknowledging the pain and seeking to honor their memories. The air grew thick with anticipation, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly as I continued to communicate. Minutes passed in silence, the atmosphere calm and respectful. Then, the whispers returned, softer and more harmonious, as if the spirits were finally finding peace. The temperature normalized, and the heavy presence that had once dominated the room dissipated, leaving behind a serene stillness. The apparitions appeared once more, but this time, there was a sense of gratitude in their eyes. They nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of the closure they had long sought. As the last whispers faded, a profound silence settled over the penitentiary. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had honored the memories of those who had endured unimaginable pain. The voices in the darkness had been heard, not through fear or confrontation, but through understanding and respect for the stories that shaped the jail's dark legacy. Leaving the penitentiary that night, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted from my shoulders. The building stood silent, no longer a place of torment but a monument to resilience and the enduring human spirit. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering and respecting the stories that shape our history. The Philadelphia County Jail remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a testament to the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of the Philadelphia County Jail, remember the tales of those who endured its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. The jail is not just a relic of history, it's a living memory of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the haunting reminders that some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story number 4. Western Penitentiary, the Curse of the Executioner. I've always been drawn to places with dark histories, locations where the past whispers through the walls and the shadows seem to hold secrets too heavy to bear. So, when I heard about the Western Penitentiary's notorious reputation, I knew I had to investigate. Located on the outskirts of town, the penitentiary had been abandoned for decades, its imposing facade now a relic of a bygone era. But it wasn't just the architecture that intrigued me. It was the story of the curse that had plagued the prison ever since the execution of a particular inmate, a tale that sent chills down the spines of locals. Western Penitentiary was built in the late 19th century, designed to house the most dangerous criminals. Its execution block was the heart of the facility, a place where lives were ended in a final, irrevocable manner. Among the inmates, there was one man who stood out, not for his crimes, but for the legend that followed his execution. Jeremiah Blackwood, a hardened criminal with a reputation for cruelty, had been executed in the penitentiary's gas chamber. On the night of his death, something went terribly wrong. The gas leaked, leading to a series of catastrophic failures. Fires erupted without warning. Explosions shattered the silence, and the screams of inmates echoed through the night. After that night, the penitentiary was plagued by unexplained phenomena, leading to its eventual closure. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to spend a night inside the old penitentiary. Armed with my camera, a voice recorder, and a notebook, I arrived just as the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the crumbling grounds. The main gate creaked open, protesting my entry, and I stepped into the decaying lobby. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, a stark contrast to the bustling city I had left behind. As I wandered through the deserted corridors, the oppressive atmosphere pressed down on me. The walls, once pristine white, were now stained and peeling, covered in graffiti and the remnants of past struggles. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the narrow hallways. Every step I took seemed to echo louder than the last, the sound reverberating through the empty prison like a haunting reminder of its dark past. I made my way to the execution block, the epicenter of the penitentiary's malevolent energy. The door to the gas chamber was ajar, the heavy metal bars rusted and worn. Pushing it open, I stepped inside, the room eerily silent except for the distant drip of water. The chamber itself was a cold, metallic space, with the remnants of old gas equipment scattered about. I set up my camera and recorder, the anticipation building as I prepared to document any signs of the supernatural. Minutes turned into hours as I explored the room, my equipment capturing nothing but the oppressive silence. Just as I began to lose hope, a sudden chill swept through the chamber, causing my breath to fog in the air. I glanced around, noticing the temperature had plummeted despite the warm night outside. My recorder picked up a faint whisper, indistinct but undeniably present. I leaned in, trying to make out the words, but the sound dissipated as quickly as it had come. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I continued my exploration, moving deeper into the penitentiary. The further I went, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. Walls seemed to close in, and the air grew heavier with each passing moment. As I approached the old cells, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. the weight of countless untold stories pressing down on me. I decided to enter one of the cells, the door swinging open with a loud creak. Inside, the space was cramped and claustrophobic, the iron bars cold to the touch. I set up my equipment, hoping to capture any paranormal activity. As I sat there, the silence was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. My heart raced as I turned off the recorder, the only light coming from my flickering flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, as if someone or something was approaching. I held my breath, trying to remain still, but the fear was overwhelming. Suddenly, the door to the cell burst open, slamming against the wall with a force that sent tremors through the room. I jumped to my feet, my flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. In the brief moment of darkness, I heard a blood-curdling scream, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the penitentiary. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my equipment and fleeing the cell. The corridors seemed endless, twisting and turning in impossible ways, leading me deeper into the labyrinthine prison. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified, creating a symphony of fear that played relentlessly in my mind. The screams followed me, echoing through the halls, a constant reminder of the curse that haunted Western Penitentiary. I reached the entrance hall, desperate to escape, but the door was nowhere to be found. Instead, I found myself in front of the gas chamber once more, the room pulsating with a dark energy. The whispers grew louder, turning into anguished cries that filled the air with despair. I backed away, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The temperature plummeted further, frost forming on the windows as I struggled to catch my breath. In the center of the room stood a figure, dark and imposing, his presence overwhelming. Jeremiah Blackwood, or the specter that bore his name, materialized before me, his eyes hollow and filled with rage. He raised his hand, pointing directly at me, and the room seemed to shake with his anger. Flames ignited around the chamber, engulfing everything in a fiery blaze that defied logic and reason. The heat was unbearable, yet the cold persisted, creating a paradox that left me disoriented and terrified. I tried to speak, to reason with the apparition, but no words came out. The screams intensified, surrounding me from all sides, a chorus of the damned that echoed the chaos of that fateful night. The flames grew higher, the smoke thickening, making it hard to breathe. I felt the walls closing in, the very structure of the penitentiary bending under the weight of the curse. In a desperate attempt to escape, I ran towards where I thought the exit should be, but the room seemed to shift, the layout changing to trap me within its fiery embrace. The screams morphed into chants, a dark incantation that reverberated through my very being. I collapsed to the ground, the heat and cold battling within me, my vision blurred by tears and smoke. Just as I felt my strength waning, a blinding light pierced through the darkness, momentarily halting the chaos. The flames subsided, the temperature stabilized, and the screams faded into a haunting silence. Jeremiah Blackwood stood before me, his form flickering like a dying flame. He looked into my eyes, a silent plea for release evident in his gaze. Slowly, he began to dissipate, the darkness around him lifting as if a burden had been lifted. I lay there, breathless and shaken, as the room returned to its former state, cold, silent, and empty. The door to the gas chamber reopened, allowing me to stumble out into the dimly lit corridor. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by an eerie calm that felt both comforting and unsettling. I made my way to the exit, the weight of the penitentiary's history pressing down on me, but with a sense of closure that I hadn't anticipated. As I stepped outside, the first light of dawn began to break, casting a pale glow over the abandoned penitentiary. The gates swung open effortlessly, as if inviting me to leave. I glanced back one last time, the building standing silent and still, its dark secrets finally laid to rest. The curse of Jeremiah Blackwood had been lifted, but the memories of that night would linger with me forever. In the days that followed, strange occurrences became a part of my daily life, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dead of night, and shadows that seemed to flicker just beyond my vision. It was as if the spirits of Western Penitentiary had followed me, unwilling to let their stories fade into obscurity. My camera and recorder, once tools of curiosity, now served as grim reminders of the night I faced the curse head-on. Determined to find peace, I delved deeper into the penitentiary's history, uncovering accounts of brutality, desperation, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Each story added another layer to the haunting legacy of Western Penitentiary, revealing the human cost of a system built on fear and retribution. I realized that the curse wasn't just a supernatural phenomenon. It was a manifestation of the collective pain and suffering that had transpired within those walls. One evening, unable to bear the haunting memories any longer, I decided to return to Western Penitentiary, armed with new equipment and a resolve to honor the memories of those who had suffered. I approached the building once more. The gates opened without resistance, and I stepped into the familiar yet foreboding grounds. This time, I wasn't seeking answers for myself, but striving to give voice to the forgotten souls trapped in the penitentiary's dark history. I walked through the corridors with a sense of purpose. Setting up my equipment in the gas chamber once more, I began to speak, recounting the stories I had uncovered, acknowledging the pain and seeking to honor their memories. The air grew thick with anticipation, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly as I continued to communicate. Minutes passed in silence, the atmosphere calm and respectful. Then, the whispers returned, softer and more harmonious, as if the spirits were finally finding peace. The temperature normalized, and the heavy presence that had once dominated the room dissipated, leaving behind a serene stillness. Jeremiah Blackwood's apparition appeared once more, but this time, there was a sense of gratitude in his eyes. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of the closure he had long sought. As the last whispers faded, a profound silence settled over the penitentiary. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had honored the memories of those who had endured unimaginable pain. The curse of Western Penitentiary had been lifted, not through fear or confrontation, but through understanding and respect for the stories that shaped its dark legacy. Leaving the penitentiary that night, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted from my shoulders. The building stood silent, no longer a place of torment but a monument to resilience and the enduring human spirit. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering and respecting the stories that shape our history. Western Penitentiary remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a testament to the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes, those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of Western Penitentiary, remember the tales of those who endured its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. The penitentiary is not just a relic of history, it's a living memory of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the haunting reminders that some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story number 5. Old Allegheny County Jail whispers in the walls. I've always been drawn to places where history lingers in the air, where the past refuses to be forgotten. As a freelance journalist specializing in uncovering the hidden stories of Philadelphia, I thought converting the old Allegheny County Jail into government offices would be a fascinating subject. Little did I know, the building harbored secrets that would haunt me long after I left its cold stone corridors. The old Allegheny County Jail, now repurposed as administrative offices, stands as a stark reminder of a bygone era. built in the early 19th century. Its imposing facade of dark bricks and iron bars exudes an aura of intimidation. Despite renovations, the building retains its original layout: narrow hallways, small barred windows, and cells that once held desperate souls. My curiosity was piqued by numerous reports from current employees about unexplained phenomena. Fleeting shadows, metallic clangs echoing through empty corridors, and an inexplicable chill that blankets the office spaces even on the warmest days. Determined to get to the bottom of these eerie accounts, I arranged to spend a night inside the jail, equipped with my notebook, a digital recorder, and a camera. As dusk settled over Philadelphia, I arrived at the building, its towering presence casting long shadows in the fading light. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a grand but decaying lobby. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something else, something metallic and unsettling. I made my way to the administrative offices, where the transformation from jail to workplace was evident. Desks replaced cells, and fluorescent lights hung where torches once burned. Yet, the atmosphere remained oppressive, as if the walls themselves still held onto the suffering of the past. I set up my equipment in a corner, the digital recorder capturing the faint hum of modern electronics juxtaposed against the building's ancient architecture. Hours passed with nothing out of the ordinary. I reviewed my notes, scribbling down observations and formulating questions about the jail's history. Then, just as midnight approached, the first sign of unease made itself known. A sudden drop in temperature swept through the room, causing my breath to fog in the air. I glanced around, noticing my breath visible despite the warm summer night outside. The digital thermometer on my desk confirmed it, a chilling 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the midst of a 75-degree evening. Before I could process the anomaly, a loud clang echoed from the hallway. My heart raced as I grabbed my camera and cautiously approached the door, peering into the dimly lit corridor. I saw nothing but the interplay of shadows cast by the flickering overhead lights. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded small and tentative in the vast, empty space. No response came, just the lingering sound of my own footsteps as I retreated to my setup. Minutes later, the phenomenon repeated. A series of metallic bangs reverberated through the building, synchronized with the flickering lights. Each clang seemed deliberate, almost as if someone or something was trying to communicate. I decided to follow the sounds, my curiosity overpowering my growing sense of dread. The corridors felt endless, each turn leading me deeper into the heart of the old jail. As I walked, the temperature continued to drop, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the intermittent clangs and the distant sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to follow me, quickened my pace, trying to outdistance the invisible presence. But the sounds only grew louder, echoing off the stone walls in a cacophony of fear. Turning a corner, I found myself in front of what used to be the warden's office. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a room filled with old wooden furniture and dusty archives. I pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud creak. Inside, the air was thick with history, and the temperature plummeted further. My recorder picked up faint whispers, indistinct voices that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I set my equipment down, feeling an overwhelming urge to document everything. As I began to speak into the recorder, narrating my experiences, the room seemed to come alive with energy. The whispers grew louder, more coherent, as if the spirits of former inmates were sharing their stories. I listened intently, trying to make sense of the fragmented sentences. Justice denied. Never leave. Pain. A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candle I had lit earlier for light. I fumbled in the darkness, turning on my flashlight, only to see a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through my very soul. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, unable to move or speak. The figure began to move towards me, each step deliberate and slow. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. but the room seemed to expand, the walls stretching outward, trapping me in a nightmare. The whispers turned into anguished cries, echoing around me as the temperature continued to drop. I could feel the presence pressing in, a manifestation of the jail's dark past, demanding recognition and release. Desperate to escape, I turned and ran, the sound of my own footsteps mingling with the spectral echoes chasing me through the labyrinthine corridors. The walls seemed to close in, the oppressive atmosphere suffocating me as I navigated the maze-like structure. Every door I opened led to more shadows, more whispers, more fear. Finally, I burst through the main entrance, gasping for air as the cool night breeze hit my face. The building stood silent and still behind me, the haunting sounds fading into the distance. I looked back, half expecting to see the shadowy figures still roaming the grounds. But the old Allegheny County Jail remained as it always had, silent, imposing, and full of secrets. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the experience. Strange things began happening in my home, whispers in the dead of night, unexplained cold spots, and fleeting shadows that vanished upon closer inspection. My camera and recorder, once symbols of my investigative passion, now served as grim reminders of the night I spent in the jail, facing the restless spirits that refused to be forgotten. Determined to understand what I had encountered, I delved deeper into the jail's history. I discovered accounts of brutal punishments, overcrowded cells, and countless lives lost within those walls. The old Allegheny County Jail had been a place of suffering and despair, where justice was often a distant concept, and the cries of the wronged still echoed through time. One evening, unable to bear the haunting memories any longer, I returned to the jail, armed with new equipment and a resolve to confront the spirits. I entered the building once more. The familiar corridors greeted me with an eerie silence, the oppressive atmosphere unchanged by the passage of time. I made my way to the warden's office, setting up my recorder and camera with a renewed sense of purpose. This time, I was determined to communicate, to give voice to the suffering souls trapped within the walls. I began to speak, recounting the stories I had uncovered, acknowledging their pain and seeking to honor their memories. The air grew thick with anticipation, and the whispers returned. But this time they were softer, more hopeful. As I continued to speak, the shadowy figures began to materialize, not with anger, but with a sense of release. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a serene energy that filled the room. The spirits, once restless and tormented, found solace in finally being heard. The temperature normalized, and the chilling presence dissipated, leaving behind a peaceful stillness. Leaving the old Allegheny County Jail that night, I felt a profound sense of closure. The building, once a symbol of oppression and suffering, now stood as a testament to resilience and the enduring human spirit. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering and respecting the stories that shape our history. The old Allegheny County Jail remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a reminder of the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of the old Allegheny County Jail, remember the tales of those who endured its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. The jail is not just a relic of history. It's a living memory of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the haunting reminders that some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story number 6. Eastern State Penitentiary, the most notorious haunted prison. I've always been fascinated by places steeped in history and mystery, locations where the veil between the past and present seems unnaturally thin. So, when I heard about the haunted legends surrounding Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. I knew I had to experience it for myself. Built in 1829, Eastern State was once the most expensive and progressive prison in the world, known for its radical system of solitary confinement. Notorious inmates like Al Capone walked its corridors, and over the decades, countless stories of restless spirits have emerged, making it the most famous haunted prison in America. The night I decided to visit Eastern State was colder than usual for early October. A thick fog rolled in from the Schuylkill River, wrapping the imposing Gothic structure in an eerie silence. The penitentiary's towering spires and sprawling wings loomed against the darkening sky, their stone walls casting long, sinister shadows. Armed with my camera, a flashlight, and a voice recorder, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as I approached the grand entrance. The gate creaked open with a reluctant groan. As if protesting my entry, I stepped onto the grounds, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the bustling city just a few miles away. As I walked through the deserted courtyard, the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the night breeze. Inside, the penitentiary was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and dimly lit cells, each one holding its own story of despair and punishment. The oppressive atmosphere was palpable, the weight of centuries of suffering pressing down on me. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting fleeting shadows that danced on the walls, making it hard to discern reality from imagination. I made my way to the infamous solitary confinement block, the heart of Eastern State's punitive system. The cells here were small, with thick stone walls and heavy iron doors, designed to isolate inmates completely. As I approached, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the very walls were whispering secrets of the tormented souls who had endured unimaginable isolation within these confines. Setting up my equipment in the center of the corridor, I began to speak into the recorder, detailing my observations and experiences. The only sound was my own voice echoing through the empty halls. Minutes turned into hours as I wandered through the penitentiary, exploring different sections and documenting any unusual occurrences. Each step seemed to take me deeper into the prison's dark history, unraveling tales of punishment, rebellion, and restless spirits. Around midnight, I found myself in the infamous Al Capone cell, a place rumored to be one of the most haunted areas in the penitentiary. The cell was small, barely larger than a closet, with a single window barred and barely letting in any light. As I entered, the temperature dropped noticeably, my breath visible in the frigid air. I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and anger, emotions that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I decided to conduct a séance, hoping to communicate with any lingering spirits. Sitting cross-legged on the cold, hard floor, I began to chant softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The air grew thick with tension, and the silence was broken by the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor. My heart raced as I strained to hear any response, but the footsteps faded as quickly as they had appeared. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the cell block, followed by a chorus of distant screams and muffled cries. My flashlight flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to reach out towards me. I grabbed the recorder, hoping to capture any supernatural voices, but it only picked up static and distorted noises. The oppressive atmosphere intensified, making it hard to breathe, as if the very walls were closing in on me. Determined to uncover the truth, I moved deeper into the penitentiary, heading towards the old exercise yard where numerous violent incidents had taken place over the years. The yard was eerily silent, the moonlight casting long, ghostly shadows on the ground. As I walked along the perimeter, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. Slow and deliberate, I turned around, but no one was there. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickened my pace, the footsteps matching my every move. I decided to split up, taking different paths to cover more ground. As I ventured into the west wing, the temperature continued to drop, my breath forming small clouds in the air. The walls here were adorned with graffiti and old, faded messages left by inmates long gone. I felt a presence nearby, an intangible force watching my every move. My flashlight illuminated a cell where a shadowy figure stood, his form wavering like smoke in the wind. I froze, unable to move as the figure extended a hand towards me, eyes hollow and filled with anguish. Panic surged through me as I backed away, stumbling over the uneven floor. The figure dissipated into the darkness, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the sound of my own heartbeat. I pressed on, desperately trying to shake off the feeling of being hunted. As I reached the central hub of the penitentiary, I heard the faint sound of a piano playing somewhere in the distance, a melancholic melody that seemed out of place in the abandoned prison. Compelled by curiosity, I followed the music, winding my way through a series of narrow corridors until I found myself in what once was the penitentiary's grand ballroom. The room was vast, with high ceilings and ornate decorations now covered in dust and cobwebs. An old grand piano sat in the center, the keys moving as if played by an invisible hand. I approached cautiously, the music growing louder, more sorrowful. As I reached out to touch the piano, the room plunged into darkness, my flashlight extinguished by an unseen force. I heard the sound of glass shattering, followed by the chilling laughter of a child echoing through the hallways. My heart raced as I fumbled to turn the flashlight back on, but it remained dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. In the darkness, I felt a cold hand grasp my shoulder, spinning me around. There, in the beam of my flashlight, stood a figure dressed in old-fashioned prison garb, face twisted in rage and despair. His eyes bore into mine, filled with a longing for release from the eternal torment that bound it to this place. I tried to speak, but no words came out, only a strangled gasp as the figure reached out towards me, fingers clawing at my skin. I turned and fled, running through the labyrinthine corridors with no sense of direction, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. Screams, whispers, and the relentless pounding of footsteps chased me through the darkened prison, each turn leading me deeper into a nightmare from which there was no escape. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos, but all I could focus on was the overwhelming fear that something was hunting me, feeding off my terror. Finally, I burst through the main gates, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, gasping for breath and shaking uncontrollably. The penitentiary stood silent behind me, its dark silhouette a stark reminder of the horrors I had just experienced. I glanced back, half expecting to see the spirits still roaming the grounds, but the fog had thickened, swallowing the prison in a blanket of white. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memories of that night. Strange occurrences plagued me, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dead of night, and shadows flitting just out of sight. My camera and recorder, once symbols of my curiosity, now served as grim reminders of the darkness that lurked within Eastern State Penitentiary. Determined to understand what I had encountered, I delved into the prison's history, uncovering stories of brutality, rebellion, and untimely deaths. Each tale of suffering and injustice seemed to echo the spirit's lingering presence, their unfinished business anchoring them to the mortal realm. I realized that Eastern State was not just a building of stone and iron, but a repository of pain and vengeance, where the past refused to stay buried. One evening, unable to bear the haunting memories any longer, I decided to return to Eastern State, hoping to find some form of closure. Armed with renewed determination and a deeper respect for the souls that inhabited the prison, I approached the gates once more. The penitentiary stood as imposing as ever, but there was a sense of acceptance in the air, as if the spirits were ready to move on. Inside, I walked the familiar corridors with a sense of purpose, setting up my equipment in the central hub. I spoke aloud, acknowledging the suffering and asking for peace. hoping to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The air was still, the oppressive weight lifting slightly as I continued to communicate with the spirits. Minutes passed in silence, the atmosphere calm and respectful. Then, the grand piano began to play again. But this time the melody was gentle, almost soothing. I felt a presence nearby, not one of anger, but of gratitude. The spirits were finally heard, their stories acknowledged. The oppressive darkness seemed to lift, replaced by a serene energy that filled the room. As the last notes of the piano faded, a profound silence settled over Eastern State Penitentiary. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I had honored the memories of those who had suffered within these walls. The spirits, once restless and vengeful, had found their closure, their stories finally told. Leaving the penitentiary that night, the fog had lifted, revealing the penitentiary in a new light. It stood as a monument to both the horrors of the past and the resilience of the human spirit. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering and respecting the stories that shape our history. Eastern State Penitentiary remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a testament to the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes, those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of Eastern State, remember the tales of those who endured its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. Eastern State is not just a relic of history. It's a living memory of the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience, and the haunting reminders that some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story number 7. Holmesburg Prison, the dreaded experiments. I've never been one to believe in ghosts. Skeptical by nature, I always dismissed tales of the supernatural as mere figments of overactive imaginations. That was until I stepped foot inside Holmesburg Prison. Nestled in Philadelphia, Holmesburg stood as a relic of a bygone era, its crumbling walls and iron-barred windows whispering secrets of the past. Little did I know, those secrets would haunt me long after I left. As a writer obsessed with uncovering the hidden and the mysterious, Holmesburg was the perfect setting for my next project. The prison, operational from 1896 to 1995, had a dark history that extended beyond its oppressive atmosphere. It was infamous for the unethical medical experiments conducted on inmates, experiments that blurred the lines between science and cruelty. Stories of prisoners subjected to painful procedures without consent circulated for years, fueling rumors of lingering spirits seeking vengeance. My journey began on a gloomy October evening. The sky was overcast, and a steady drizzle set the mood as I approached the imposing gates of Holmesburg. The rain seemed to dampen not just the surroundings but also my resolve. With a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy iron gates and stepped into the foreboding compound. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the bustling city nearby. Inside, the prison loomed large, its architecture a blend of utilitarian harshness and Gothic despair. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, shadows dancing eerily on the walls. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Each step echoed through the silent halls, a constant reminder of the isolation and suffering that once filled this place. I made my way to the old medical wing, the epicenter of the heinous experiments. The door creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Rusted medical equipment lay scattered across the tables, and faded diagrams adorned the walls. The air was colder here, almost unnaturally so, sending shivers down my spine. I set up my camera and began documenting the space, hoping to capture any anomalies. As I delved deeper into the room, an overwhelming sense of unease settled over me. It felt as though the very walls were watching, listening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My flashlight flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I tried to rationalize it. Old buildings often have electrical issues, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence. My heart raced as I spun around, flashlight darting to pinpoint the source. The sound had come from the far end of the room, where an old operating table stood. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming to flee. As I drew closer, the temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. There, on the table, was the apparition of a man. His eyes were hollow, filled with an unbearable sorrow and rage. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged, only silent pleas for help. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away. The room seemed to close in around me, the oppressive atmosphere suffocating. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. The ghostly figure began to convulse, his form distorting as if caught in an invisible torment. I could feel the weight of his suffering, the injustice of his fate pressing down on me. Desperately, I tried to communicate, calling out his name, but he remained silent, trapped in his eternal agony. A sudden gust of wind extinguished my flashlight, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to turn it back on, but the device remained stubbornly dead. In the pitch black, I heard footsteps, rapid, frantic, chasing me through the labyrinthine corridors. My breath quickened, each step a desperate attempt to escape the nightmare unfolding around me. I stumbled through the halls, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. Whispers echoed in my ears, voices from the past reliving their torment. Doors slammed shut on their own, and shadows lengthened and twisted, blocking my path. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos, but logic abandoned me, replaced by sheer terror. Finally, I burst through a set of double doors, gasping for breath. Sunlight streamed in, a stark contrast to the darkness I had fled. I glanced back, expecting to see my pursuers, but the prison stood silent once more. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way to the exit, every step a struggle against the lingering fear. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving the world washed clean. I looked back at Holmesburg Prison, its silhouette dark against the fading light. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the haunting memories of what I had experienced. The screams, the ghostly apparitions, the relentless pursuit, they were etched into my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors that transpired within those walls. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange occurrences plagued me, whispers in the night, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision. It was as if the spirits of Holmesburg had followed me, unwilling to let their stories fade into obscurity. My sleep was restless, haunted by dreams of the tormented souls seeking justice. Determined to put an end to the nightmare, I returned to Holmesburg, this time with a deeper understanding of the suffering that occurred there. Armed with new equipment and a resolve to document the truth, I delved into the prison's darkest corners once more. This time, I wasn't just a visitor, I was a witness, determined to honor the memories of those who endured unimaginable pain. As I navigated the familiar corridors, the air grew heavy with anticipation. I reached the medical wing, where the previous horrors had unfolded. Setting up my recording devices, I began to speak, recounting the stories of the prisoners who had been subjected to cruel experiments. My voice echoed through the empty halls, a solemn tribute to their suffering. Minutes passed in silence, the oppressive atmosphere hanging thick. Suddenly, the room came alive with whispers, voices intertwining in a sorrowful chorus. The apparitions materialized once more, their presence more tangible than before. This time, however, there was a sense of peace, as if they were finally being heard. One by one, the spirits shared their stories, their voices blending into a tapestry of pain and resilience. I listened, captivated by their tales of endurance and the desperate search for redemption. It was a powerful reminder of the human capacity for both cruelty and survival, a testament to the strength of the human spirit even in the face of unimaginable suffering. As the last voice faded, a profound silence settled over the room. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a sense of closure. The spirits had found their peace, their stories finally told. I felt a deep sense of gratitude, honored to have been a conduit for their memories. Leaving Holmesburg that night, the rain had ceased, and the air felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. The prison stood silent, no longer a place of torment but a monument to the resilience of those who endured its horrors. My experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Holmesburg Prison remains a place of dark history and lingering spirits, a reminder of the atrocities that can occur when humanity is stripped away. My journey there taught me that every place has its stories, some too painful to forget, and sometimes those stories demand to be heard, so that the past is never forgotten, and the echoes of suffering can finally find peace. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remnants of Holmesburg, remember the tales of those who suffered within its walls. Approach with respect and understanding, for the spirits of the past linger still, yearning to share their stories and seek the justice they never received. Holmesburg is not just a relic of history. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit and the haunting memories that refuse to fade.